Welcome. Social Vision was published through the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and Society, which aims to bring Jewish spiritual knowledge to bear on the toughest challenges of contemporary society. I'm going to turn this over to Eli Rubin now to get us started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eli Rubin. Together with Philip Wexler, I helped write this book, Social Vision, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Transformative Paradigm for the World. And I'm going to be discussing the book today with Dr. Naftali Loewenthal, who's the author of this book, Hasidism Beyond Modernity, Essays in Habad Thought and History, and also he's a teaching fellow at the Department of Religious Studies, the Department of Hebrew and Jewish Studies at University College London. Also with me is Dr. Ariel Mayse, who's the author of this book, Speaking Infinities, God and Language in the Teachings of Rabbi of Mezritsh. And he is an assistant professor in the Department of Religion at Stanford University. So my first question is going to be for Dr. Loewenthal, and it's a double-barreled question. The title of your own book is Hasidism Beyond Modernity. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to take Hasidism beyond modernity? And how does Philip Wexler's argument in Social Vision help us to think about the trajectory of Hasidus beyond the present moment?
Right. So, Hasidism Beyond Modernity, first of all, looking at it. Originally, my book was going to be called Hasidism and Modernity. The problem was that I took so long writing it that modernity disappeared. So I had to call it something else. I called it Hasidism Beyond Modernity. But there are two meanings to this. One is it's beyond the secularizing limitations of modernity. But we normally have the simple trajectory. There's tradition, then there's secularism, and thus you come to modernity. So in other words, tradition has no role. So my book is about Habad Hasidism as saying that, yes, there is a role for tradition in the modern world. Now that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is that modernity itself has within it the seeds of its own transformation. If we take modernity as a process, which leads actually to postmodernism, so we actually come to something which is very Hasidic in concept. So there are modernistic elements in Hasidism, or postmodernistic elements in Hasidism, I argue, and those elements are precisely what makes Chabad so unique. So for example, in Tanya, we have in chapter 32 about love of one's fellow. So it says over there that the person who is in some way transgressing, you should love that person, and maybe he or she will change their ways and they'll start keeping the Torah and the mitzvah. Veheim lo, but if not, lo hifsitzcha avat reim. You haven't lost the mitzvah of love of your fellow. In other words, the guy continues to eat pork on Yom Kippur. The woman continues to be whatever she is doing, but nonetheless, you love that person. You care for that person. So that is really the postmodern term. And what I was trying to say is that these concepts typify Chabad, and that's what I tried to write about in my book. Now we come to Philip Wexler and his beautiful book, Social Vision, which together with you, Eddie, that you wrote together, and it's something really special. Now, at the very beginning, we have a very important concept. How relevant is religion? Marx called, as Philip puts in his introduction, Marx called religion the opium of the people. It's irrelevant. It's just the way you keep the people quiet while capitalism gets on the way. But in fact, according to Weber, no, religion is the key structure, even though people are no longer religious, they're secularized. But the kernel of religion still has an effect. The Protestant ethic creates the spirit of capitalism. Now these are very, very valuable concepts because it's saying religion is something fundamental. And so that's what Philip Wexler is saying, that the idea of Hasidism is not irrelevant to modernity and post-modernity and the transitions which are going to take place. It's something crucial. And in my terminology, I would say making Hasidism into a cultural factor is absolutely vital. It changes the paradigms by which people see life. And that is a crucial step that Philip and you, Eli, have achieved in this book. And I think that's you're mapping out the direction for achieving it. Now, I'd like to present, just got a couple of minutes, I'd like to present 4 aspects of what it means learning Hasidism. Now, one way is someone, might be in a yeshiva or wherever, learning Hasidic teachings. Okay, it's very inspiring. You can pray, you can you do contemplation, you can analyze the Torah, you can give comments on Rashi. It's wonderful. Another level is not only learning it, but applying it to oneself, becoming a really loving person, becoming a deeper, more profound person. And also, and this is the Habad knech, the Habad emphasis, loving one's neighbor. It's not only loving yourself and caring that if you are a deeper person and you're more spiritual, then you'll go to a greater Garden of Eden. No, that's not what it's about. What effect do you have on another person? How do you implement that? So there, the Rebbe's motto, love of God, love of Torah, and love of one's fellow, those 3 concepts together. So that's the second dimension of Hasidism. The third dimension is writing the history of this process. So in books like the one that Eli showed, that's what I'm trying to do generally in my work in the academy, writing the history of this process. The 4th stage is what Philip is trying and Eli are trying to do in this book. Turn the whole bundle into a cultural factor, a serum for society. And that's what's happening here. Now, this pandemic imagery is very useful. Modernity, as Weber writes and Philip discusses at length, modernity is an iron cage. Why is it an iron cage? The mix of the focus on money where brothers become others because of economic gain. That's a fascinating page in Weber's book, which I often use in my class on Hasidism and modernity at UCL. We discuss what is modernity. And I have this page of Max Weber, where he talks about the traditional relationship that my grandfather had with your grandfather. They used to do business together. So therefore, it's reasonable. You and me should do business together. It breaks down because of the profit motive. No, I'm going to do business with someone else. I don't care about you. The Bruder becomes an order. The brother becomes another. Works in German and in English. So that, then the instrumentalization of other people. Now, all that is the iron cage, leading to alienation and all kinds of other things which Marx himself writes about. And so what Wexler is saying is that Chabad Hasidism is, and particularly with the Rebbe at the center, is the serum, is the antidote to this pandemic, to this global illness. The serum, the antidote to that is a completely different way to relate to oneself, to society, to family, to people in prison, to every aspect of existence. And I think that's a vitally important thing that Philip and Eli together have produced, and the way to further that in society through conferences, other publications, getting this serum into the public organic whole and changing the world. I think it's beautiful. L'chaim.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Mayse, both your book, Speaking Infinities, and Philip's Social Vision begin with a foundational teaching of the Baal Shem Tov about the sacredness that must be consciously invested in all speech. This suggests that from the very beginning, the Hasidic masters endowed communication and the interpersonal dynamic with special sacred value. Is there something unique about how the Rebbe specifically developed this principle and applied it?
Thanks, Rabbi Rubin. Wonderful question, and wonderful to be here with you, Rabbi Loewenthal, friends and teachers. It's so lovely. Thank you for this honor. So I wanted to read just very briefly this passage from the Igeret HaKodesh, from the holy letter of the Baal Shem, from the Baal Shem Tov. It's on page 16 of your really remarkable and wonderful book. The Baal Shem Tov instructs his brother-in-law, when you pray and study, and in every single word and utterance of your lips, have intent to unify the name of God. For in every single letter there are worlds, souls, and divinity. They ascend, bond, and unite with one another, uniting in true singularity with divinity. And when you shall encompass your soul together with them, and all the worlds unite as one and ascend, making great joy and pleasure without measure. It's a remarkable passage, and indeed, I think it's one of the cornerstones of what I understand to be one of the major through lines of Hasidic thought and devotion, which is this reorientation toward the sacral quality of language. The medieval Kabbalists have lots to say about the uniqueness of Hebrew and about the uniqueness of Hebrew, perhaps even vis-a-vis other languages. It's the central trunk from which all other languages emerge. But Lashon HaKodesh is really applied to Hebrew. The holy language, the lingua sacra, is Hebrew, and that's something that makes it distinct. What you begin to see in the teachings of the Besht, what opens up in the teachings of the Maggid, which find fuller expression in the writings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi and many people of his generation, and this indeed continues straight into the heart of the Rebbe's teachings, is that language is a sacred vessel, or at least it can be transformed into thus. And that's true of Hebrew, but it's not only true of Hebrew, it's true of other languages as well, which can be equally suffused, or if not equally, alternatively, and in addition, suffused with this kind of divinity, because it's not just Hebrew that has worlds, souls, and divinity. It's the language that is spoken with earnestness and presence. You, Eli, and the others in the Wexler and Wexler team have a beautiful passage on page 19, which I think summarizes this. Intentional speech, accordingly, can transformatively sacralize even the most mundane or secular utterance. You may be talking about a business transaction or running through a list of household chores, and yet you are uniting unions. Your speech act is a cosmic communication, a socio-mystical incantation, a disclosure of the divine light that inheres even within the crass darkness of our physical habitation. So language is about communication, and Rabbi Loewenthal, Dr. Loewenthal, you've written about this so beautifully in your first book, which was a real tour de force exploration of Habad's desire and the ability of Rabbi Shneur Zalman and then the Mittler Rebbe to construct a theology of language and a theology in which communication of the infinite is at the heart of what Hasidism is here to do. So language is all about communication because language is shared in between two individuals. It's a part of the social fabric. Therefore, and this is one of the great contributions of this book, is that it demonstrates with such tremendous vitality and persuasiveness that the straw man or straw person of mysticism as this kind of retreat from the world, from the retreat from the physical world, which inheres in the popular imagination as well as in the scholarly community, is not an understanding of mysticism that should apply to Hasidism. Hasidism is, as it were, baked into the cake, a social phenomenon with social transformation at its aim. But language is also the gateway to our inner world, and I think you highlight this as well. The gateway to the inner world leads us to find the infinite realm that dwells within each and every human being, and it functions then as a sort of as a kind of dual portal into the infinity that is in the cosmos and the infinity that lies within each and every human being, and therefore becomes one of the, you might say, the sort of one of the axioms or the fundaments of what any sort of devotional life and any sort of social life is. So for the authors of this book, Wexler, and Rubin, I think you're right in identifying language as a key part of the re-enchantment or re-sacralization efforts that you find in the Rebbe's teachings. You find that in his attempts to continue this ethos of translating the Torah into the 70 languages, which of course means literally, but also it means the bigger project of taking the Ikarim, the messages and the central teachings of Hasidus, and allowing them to flow into other bodies of knowledge and into other registers and into other literal languages, which then allows for a kind of reciprocal reorientation toward our relationship toward language. You know, we live in a world in which language has been totally debased, almost to the point of absurdity. And words are used for hate, and there were used for absolute drivel, but the kind of sacralization, the kind of a sacred word in which words become the conduit for love and communication and presence is something that is severely lacking in our world. And the Rebbe's vision offers an alternative to that view of language. A view of language in which it is a divine gift for self-discovery and for discovering about the people around us and the world around us.
Okay, so there's a question for both of you. Some people have said that the claim that this book is making is simply too ambitious to be given serious consideration, because ultimately Philip had this vision, had this intuition that the Rebbe's teachings embody an independent and innovative system of social thought, which can compete with the paradigm of social thought that we live in, and can ultimately replace it, that we could actually transform every aspect of society for the better, from interpersonal relationships, as we've discussed, but also to systematic issues like criminal justice and education, public education, or to the way that we think about and use the natural resources that power the modern economy. So are people right to say that this is too ambitious? Or maybe that's the point, that in order to understand this vision and all that it demands of us, we actually need to think with much more ambition than we are used to, or maybe that we're comfortable with. I don't know if Tali wants to take it first. And
due to age, I'm the oldest inhabitant. I'd like to start with a little, in responding to this, a little story of Hasidism outside Habad. It's a story about Rebbe Nachum Mendel, the Kotzker Rebbe, who lived in the middle of the 19th century. And just at that time, the railway was stretching through Russia, Poland, and finally the railway line reached Kotsk, or somewhere near Kotsk. So the Kotzker Rebbe went down to have a look at this new phenomenon, the railway line. And there was this old-fashioned, Mark I train. There was a train engine puffing and put smoke coming out of the chimney. And there were quite a few carriages. And then the train huffing and puffing, blowing its whistle, if they already invented whistles at that point, drove out and carrying these carriages behind it. And all the Hasidim turned to the Kotzker Rebbe and they say, "No, Rebbe, what's the Rebbe? What does the Rebbe say about this?" So the Rebbe said, the Kotzker Rebbe said, "I see, ein Heiser can schleppen asach kelter." One hot engine can pull a lot of cold carriages. Now, I think that typifies the concept of a Hasidic Rebbe, and for most Hasidic Rebbeim, their main concern was with their immediate community, or at the most, the Jewish community, the Frum community. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was concerned not only about the Lubavitch Hasidim, he was concerned with every single Jew and every single non-Jew. In his seminal discourse, the the last discourse he edited before his stroke in 1992, he said, if in one remote corner of the world there's someone who doesn't appreciate godliness, then there's something wrong with the whole. We haven't achieved what needs to be achieved. He's got a global vision. And the way in which global visions are carried through is precisely through paradigms. It's so wonderful that we have that word which completely affects the way you take a particular scene. You see the scene, one person is looking at it from one paradigm, another one from another, and they see something completely different taking place. And for the Rebbe, the paradigm of Chabad Hasidic thought, this idea of the social vision that Wexler and Rubin together, both of you, you're defining in this book, and there's more to add to that definition. You know, the extra dimensions, the role of women needs to be emphasized more. There's a lot more. It's a book in progress, and it's a project in progress. But that change of paradigm, I believe totally, the Rebbe is able to pull that off. The Rebbe's teachings have exactly that power to pull off that transformation of society, and it's nothing nothing that the Rebbe attempted he was often accused of thinking in too grandiose terms, but in fact he went straight ahead, and in many ways he's changed our concept of what an Orthodox Jew is, what a Chassid is, and eventually these teachings, helped by people like Philip Wexler, Eli, and the chain of disciples that will come, he will change what we mean by a human being.
Ariel.
Every page in this book feels like it could have been a chapter, and every chapter feels like it could have been a book. And that's the sign of a great beginning of a conversation. It's a book that twins deep academic scholarship with a sense of constructive vision. And that's a really important contribution, both to the popular world and to the academic world, is to say that this team of scholars have looked deeply into a vision that, Rabbi Loewenthal, you're exactly right, presents itself, and the Rebbe presented it as a kind of totalizing system, as a kind of global system, as a kind of cosmic system, as a kind of way of thinking about everything. And that's indeed how it's presented. To look at that and try and understand what are the principles that undergirds it, and how can that be a useful way of changing the manner in which we see our world, not as a kind of surface patch or as a kind of update, but as a reboot of the system files. And that's what I see going on here. Is it's an attempt to rethink society and rethink everything from the political and the economic and the social, all the way from the very bottom, and to rethink those things with an alternative in mind. You know, it's a paradigm shift in the most powerful way. And I think that's a wonderful way of putting it, when everything twists toward a different goal or toward a different axiom, in which the assumptions that had been undergirding have been jettisoned, and an alternative is put forward. Now, I had a couple of questions for you, Eli, which is that there's sort of three things that I was thinking about that I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about. One of the first of these is that one of the things that you struggle with in this book, and I think beautifully articulate, is the way in which the Rebbe takes a tradition in which there is this very fraught relationship between universalism and chosenness, and Jewish uniqueness, and constructs of this a more universalistic vision without compromising his love of the Jewish people and the Jewish uniqueness. So, you know, questions about race are so important at the moment. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that. The second is that in one of the later chapters, you have a beautiful section about ecology, and about the Rebbe's emphasis on solar power and the geopolitical dimensions of that. I'm wondering, is there something bigger that you might be able to say about the Rebbe's vision there, which is not just about a particular alternative means of energy, but about what it means to look at the world and see it shimmering with divinity? Is there a kind of deeper ecological vision that, if it wasn't articulated in his teachings, could we extrapolate from it and put it forward in 2020? And then I have a question about privacy and surveillance capitalism, which is something that bothers me much at the moment. And I was just sort of wondering if there's something here, because this, I think, is going to be one of the great moral questions of the next 10 years together with the others. So I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about those subjects.
Okay, well, thank you, Ariel. Those are really challenging questions, and we only have a few minutes. So I'll just say a couple of words. With regard to the first question about race, I'm actually saddened that we didn't write more about it in the book. The book, as Tali pointed out, it's kind of, we should really think about it as a book that's still in progress, because there are so many more dimensions that should have been covered and could have been covered as part of this larger perspective. But one thing that we did talk about very much is the notion that one group should not be seen as being in competition with another. And this is something that the Rebbe spoke about in many contexts, not just racial concepts, but also not just the racial context, but also the economic context and also the political context. So I just want to home in on something the Rebbe said in a political context, but I think it really applies much more broadly and also to the current questions that we're grappling with. So the Rebbe put out this notion, this was in 1975, 25 years after he had come to lead the Habad movement. And it was a milestone, and there were politicians in the room at this Farbrengen, the huge Farbrengen of 1975, and the Rebbe began to think about, what does political leadership mean? What does it mean to be a leader? And the Rebbe said that leadership applies across the entire spectrum, from the individual to the president, in the same way, and with the following principle, that a leader puts aside the personal in favor of the collective. In order to be a leader of your family, you need to be a master over yourself. You need to have the discipline to set aside self-interest for the sake of your family. In order to become a community leader, you need to put aside the interests of your family to in favor of the needs of the broader community. And then the Rebbe went from the city level to the state level, all the way to the president, who is the one who has no one above him except for God, the sovereign of all, the leader of all. And there too, the president has to put aside party political agendas and preferences in favor of the nation as a whole. And so this is something which the Rebbe came back to time and time again in so many other contexts, this need to stop thinking in terms of us and them. And he actually said it to David Dinkins when he came during Dollars, exactly this same kind of language. There are not two sides. So this concept of us and them has to be overcome, whether we're thinking, and this starts at home. It starts on the personal level, on the family level, and then we've got to build it up.